The world of Minecraft is a deeply mysterious place. Beyond the mundanity of sheep, cows, and villagers are hidden secrets, suggestions that there's more to this place than meets the eye. As we explore the world, we'll discover that there are ancient structures that provide hints of a forgotten past. Ruins litter the world, from decaying temples deep within jungles to broken portals to decrepit mine shafts. This is evidence of a time before our own, of an era dominated by a great civilization that has long since fallen. All that remains are these decaying structures, slowly being consumed by the sands of time. But one such structure is different. Buried deep beneath the surface, an intrepid explorer might stumble across the trial chambers. These are a large network of rooms and hallways, platforms and tunnels. And this place is particularly interesting because, despite the trial chamber's remote location, we do not see signs of degradation. There are no cobwebs lining the walls, no broken and cracked bricks, no missing blocks. It may initially appear that the oxidized copper indicates weathering. When a copper block is exposed to air, it progressively oxidizes, changing color from bright orange to pale green. Some blocks in the trial chambers have undergone this process, perhaps a sign of deterioration. But a closer inspection reveals the opposite. Every single copper block in the chambers has a layer of wax applied. This freezes the block in its current state, preventing further oxidation. This means that the oxidized copper is not a flaw, but an intentional design feature. The creators of this structure painstakingly applied wax to each of these blocks, a choice indicating a precise attention to detail. In fact, this detail-oriented philosophy can be found everywhere in the trial chambers. Notice the carefully chiseled designs on the tough bricks, the unbroken pots on the floor, the huge murals built into the walls. Everywhere we turn, we see evidence of an intricately designed structure with no examples of decay. The trial chambers are as pristine as the day they were constructed. Which makes this structure all the more confusing, because despite the clear evidence of intentionality in the design, there are certain construction decisions that seem, well, odd or even irrational. Take, for example, a bizarre room containing what appears to be an aquarium. We can look into a deep pool of water through a stained glass window on the floor. Gazing through, we can barely make out a room in the water. But getting there is an ordeal. We need to climb a ladder, walk over to a grate, and descend a different ladder. At the bottom, we find several beds in a cramped configuration. There are no chests, no crafting tables, no armor stands, nothing that would make this a feasible place to rest. Just 4 beds inexplicably placed inside a huge pool of water with an obnoxious entrance. Why does this exist? But there's another, much more egregious offender in poor interior design. A tiered silo with several distinct layers. The middle platform has 3 beds, again squished close to one another. What's worse is that these beds are on the edge of a 12-block drop with no protective railing. One sleepwalking incident could quickly turn into a serious injury. It's even worse than that though, because there's no way to get on or off this platform. We find no ladders and no stairs either. The only way is to drop down, taking damage in the process. How could the builders of this place, with all of the other minute details, miss such a glaring design flaw? Or what about the staircases with a hole in them, sending an unwitting player straight into a spike? Or the rooms only accessible through a 1x1 tunnel blocked by a copper grate? Or the one random area with a cactus and a dead bush? Everywhere we look, we see design features that just don't make logical sense. Remember, the trial chambers do not show the signs of deterioration seen in most other structures. And it turns out that there's a reason for this. The chambers appear to be completely sealed off from the outside world. No part of the interior is exposed to outside air. The entire compound is isolated. There's a system of air ducts blowing fresh oxygen throughout the many rooms. There's even reason to believe that the trial chambers have air conditioning. One room is covered in snow and we see blocks of solid ice. Temperatures this deep underground are far too warm for water to freeze. Instead, there must be some sort of artificial cooling system. And when we take all this together, we start to see that the trial chambers are actually extremely bizarre. There's really nothing else in the world with this unique set of properties. And yet, there's another level that only deepens this sense of weirdness. For this place is not static, it responds to players. It's time to look at one of the signature blocks of the trial chambers, the trial spawner. Regular spawners exist throughout the Minecraft world, but trial spawners are only found in the trial chambers. The 2 types of spawners do share some visual similarities to one another. Both consist of a cage with a skull design, encapsulating a spinning mob inside. When players approach, the mob spins even faster and is spawned into the world with a puff of smoke and fire. But this is where the similarities end. The trial spawner reacts to players in a much more advanced way. Instead of generating the occasional mob, it creates multiple waves of enemies. Each wave has about 6 mobs, and new enemies won't be spawned until the current wave is defeated. Furthermore, the trial spawner adapts to the number of players nearby. If there are more people, more mobs spawn per wave, something that regular spawners don't do. Trial spawners are also not dependent on light level and cannot be deactivated with a few torches. Upon completion of the trial, several reward items are ejected from a hole in the top, another capability that's missing from the regular spawner. Afterwards, the trial spawner goes into a cooldown and won't activate again for 30 minutes. There is one reward item that is especially notable, called the trial key. It appears to be made out of copper, and it has a distinctive skull design. The key is used in another of the trial chamber's signature blocks, the vault. They're scattered throughout the chambers and are easily accessible. While visually similar to trial spawners, they work in a different way. As a player approaches, the mouth of the skull opens, revealing the keyhole. Unlocking it with the trial key causes it to eject several additional items from an aperture at the top. So to recap, the way that a trial works is this. A player approaches a trial spawner and fights several waves of enemies. Upon completion, they're given a few items as a reward. They also receive a trial key, allowing them to access even better items from a vault. And suddenly, many of the inexplicable design choices begin to make sense. At their core, these trials are the reason for the trial chamber's existence. For example, the claustrophobic clusters of beds are not intended for sleeping. Rather, they serve as respawn points, allowing people who die to return to the start and re-enter the battle. The dangerous platforms and bizarre room layouts are built to make combat more difficult, challenging the participants. The snowy room gives practice in icy environments, and the different types of spawners provide experience in different combat situations. The scaling difficulty allows groups of combatants to test their ability to work as a team. The traps test vigilance and situational awareness. Overall, it seems that the gameplay is aligned with the lore. The trial chambers are designed for trials that test and sharpen fighting capabilities. So, case closed, right? The simplest explanation is the correct one. Trial chambers are, well, chambers with trials. If only it were so easy. Because if we look a little deeper, we'll realize that this place holds further mysteries beneath the surface. If we fight in enough trials, we will eventually discover a rather odd item as a reward. It's a small vial of dark liquid, called an ominous bottle. Something like this can't be good for you, but if we ignore the warning signs and drink it, our player will be granted the bad omen status effect. And this effect is far more special than it initially appears. Bad omen is extremely interesting, and this quickly becomes apparent when we compare it to other status effects. Most statuses in Minecraft affect the afflicted mob directly. Examples include changing its speed, its health, its ability to mine, its ability to see, how fast it falls, how it breathes underwater, how visible it is, and so on. Each of these effects tangibly changes some part of the mob, temporarily modifying their capabilities or properties. But Bad Omen is different. A player with Bad Omen does not notice any changes. Their combat strength and health remain the same. They don't move any differently. Their vision is clear. The experience of a player with Bad Omen is identical to one without. And this is why Bad Omen is so special, because it doesn't affect the player. Instead, it's the only status in the game that changes how other entities react to the player. It emits some sort of invisible aura, some mysterious energy, and there are certain things in the world that can sense it. For an example, we need to look no further than these very trial chambers. If a player drinks an ominous bottle and obtains Bad Omen, nearby trial spawners will suddenly react, changing colors with a burst of soulfire. These spawners have been transformed into something new, ominous trial spawners, and this process starts a different event, called an ominous trial. The core of an ominous trial is similar to a regular one. Waves of enemies spawn that need to be defeated by the player. But these trials are much more difficult for several reasons. First, ominous trial spawners gain the ability to spawn projectiles in addition to mobs. Arrows, fire charges, and wind charges can be fired, severely increasing the difficulty of a fight. Furthermore, it spawns lingering potions that can produce a variety of status effects. The chaos is compounded by the appearance of much more powerful mobs. They can be protected with diamond armor, and they attack with enchanted weaponry. For unarmored mobs, the total number can be double that of a regular trial. All of these changes combined result in an extremely difficult combat challenge. Defeating an ominous trial requires a much higher degree of skill and preparation than a regular one. Those who prove themselves capable are rewarded with a different type of key. This is the ominous trial key. While similar to regular trial keys, it is made of oxidized copper and has 3 skulls instead of 1. These keys open a different vault, called the ominous vault. They work in a similar way to regular vaults, dispensing items from the top. The loot items are much better than regular vaults and include higher level ominous bottles. But ominous vaults are far more interesting than just that. For one, they're not easily accessible. Their locations are much more secluded, found in elevated areas or behind grated tunnels. Once we do get to one, we'll find that the surrounding structure is intriguing. They're built in an oddly conspicuous way, with a design that's consistent between all of them. Beneath the block is a copper grating with red candles on either side. While white candles are found throughout the trial chambers, red candles only exist here. Furthermore, there are 2 blocks of red glazed terracotta built into the wall. This is the only place in the entire Minecraft universe where this block is naturally generated. Ominous vaults are clearly being treated with more reverence than anything else in the trial chambers. This design doesn't have any obvious practicality, and it feels a bit out of place. It's almost as if this is a shrine or an altar. And if we look at it from a distance, doesn't it seem an awful lot like a face? The terracotta represents squinty red eyes, and the vault is a mouth. Whose face this is exactly is difficult to say, although there is a clear relation to bad omen. The red eyes are visible in the ominous bottle, as well as the bad omen and trial omen status effects. This similarity cannot be an accident. Despite the undeniable intrigue, the purpose of this shrine is not obvious. But things get much more fascinating when we realize that this shrine has a connection to a completely different structure in the world. Far away from the trial chambers is one of the most captivating places in the game, the ancient cities. There are a lot of things that make the ancient cities special. They are both the deepest and the largest generated structures in the game. Ancient cities consist of a sprawling network of paths and bridges, with various elements like watchtowers and pillars. At the center is a huge rectangle structure made out of a unique block. Hidden within the base is a complex tangle of redstone contraptions, accessible only using a secret code. The ancient cities are far too complicated for me to cover in detail here. If you're interested, check out my Warden Deep Dive video. Instead, we will be focusing on a few specific sections. Deep within the city is a particularly notable ruin called the Barracks. Going there, we'll notice that there's a shrine built on the edge. These have a central block chiseled in the shape of a face. Candles flank either side, and the elevated platform is 3 blocks wide. Doesn't this look familiar? This is just like the shrine in the trial chambers. The face shape is the same, with the narrow eyes and square mouth. The size is similar, and there are also candles. It's almost as if these are 2 different versions of the same thing. This direct connection between the trial chambers and ancient cities is fascinating, but if we explore more, we'll find additional overlaps. For example, these are the only 2 locations with amethyst shards in the loot tables. The same is true for baked potatoes. Then there's the fact that both places clearly use soul energy. The signature light blue glow is seen when a trial becomes ominous. But there's a conceptual similarity as well. The ancient city ruin with the shrine is called the Barracks. Barracks are buildings that are used to house soldiers. We can even see the corridors where the beds presumably used to be. This indicates that there was a military presence in these ancient cities, probably to deal with the extreme dangers of the Warden. It seems similarly likely that the trial chambers were also used by a military. In fact, it would serve no purpose to anyone else. A civilian would quickly perish within the copper halls. It is therefore plausible that the warriors who were stationed in the ancient city would have been the same ones who trained in the trial chambers. During this process, they would have come across the ominous bottles, and they would have experienced bad omen and ominous trials. And they would have known that the ominous vault shrines were somehow an important part of bad omen. The fact that we see a very similar shrine in an ancient city military building suggests that the ancient builders also used bad omen here, applying their prior experience from the trials. While this is a notable observation, there's one obvious question left unresolved. What were they using bad omen for? There are no trial spawners in the ancient cities, and nothing happens if we enter one with a bad omen effect. So how can we explain this connection? In order to progress, we will need to consider a very important element of bad omen, one which I have yet to mention. For all its oddities, this one rises above the rest. For the ominous bottle exists elsewhere in the world, far away from the buried trial chambers and ancient cities. In fact, bad omen is still in use today, long after the demise of the ancient builders. It is known to a completely different society altogether. I am, of course, talking about the Illagers. Of all the mobs found in present-day Minecraft, the Illagers are undoubtedly the most advanced. They build huge, isolated mansions located deep within dark forests. Inside is evidence of an intelligent society, including experimentation and planning. This hard work has clearly paid off for them. Evokers can summon Vexes from the void, a capability that no other living mob has. Their explorations have culminated in the ultimate technology, the Totem of Undying, which can prevent death a single time. The Illagers have used their capabilities to project considerable power. They have outposts to keep an eye on the overworld's inhabitants. There are also more mobile units. Small groups of Illagers go on patrol, attacking any enemies on sight. These patrols are led by a raid captain, a pillager or vindicator who carries a banner and directs the group. And these raid captains are the second place in the game where the ominous bottle can be found. They are always carrying one. Killing a raid captain has a 100% chance to drop an ominous bottle. The Illagers have discovered a use for bad omen. When a player with bad omen enters a village, a raid begins. Somehow, the status effect sends an instantaneous long-distance signal to the Illagers and their allies, telling them that it's time to fight. They quickly respond and arrive at the village with waves of reinforcements close behind. Remember, bad omen is unique because it doesn't affect the user directly. Instead, it affects how other entities respond, serving as a form of communication. And for the Illagers, this would be a very useful capability indeed. Carrying an ominous bottle gives the raid captain the option to send a distress signal at any moment in time. If they ended up in a situation where they needed reinforcements, such as discovering a fresh village to raid, all they would have to do is drink the ominous bottle. Bad omen would be activated and help would arrive. The ancient builders used bad omen in a very similar way. Their warriors would train their skills in the trial chambers. After defeating waves of enemies, they would receive low-level ominous bottles. These would allow them to attempt the more difficult challenge of an ominous trial. Those who were able to pass the challenge would be rewarded with high-level ominous bottles. Any person possessing a level 3, 4, or 5 ominous bottle would have proven that they had a high degree of combat skill. They would be the leaders on the battlefield, captains who commanded others. These captains would carry ominous bottles with them at all times, especially in the extremely dangerous environment of the ancient city. If things got out of control, such as a warden on the loose, drinking the bottle would broadcast a distress signal, calling other ancient builders to come help. There's even more evidence to support this idea. Remember the shrines with the faces in the ancient cities and the trial chambers? Well, it turns out that the Illagers also use faces in a very prominent way. In fact, they're obsessed with them. They have huge statues of themselves in the woodland mansions, and banners are proudly displayed on their pillager outposts. Furthermore, raid captains carry one with them at all times. So the Illagers also have faces in the same place where the ominous bottle is found, just like the ancient builders in the trial chambers and ancient cities. This suggests that these faces are somehow an important requirement for controlling bad omen. This is further supported by the name of the banners. They're not called Illager banners, instead they're called ominous banners, more evidence that they're fundamentally important to bad omen. There are a few interesting implications to this. Ominous banners are clearly depictions of the Illagers, the ones who are using bad omen, and this observation makes us wonder about the faces on the underground shrines. Could these faces represent the ancient builders? Is this the clearest view yet of what they looked like, or at least how they viewed themselves? Perhaps this finally solves the mystery of the chiseled deep slate face. It also seems likely that the Illagers learned about bad omen from the ancient cities. While there is no indication they ever found the trial chambers, there's abundant evidence suggesting that they've been to the ancient cities. We see dark oak wood and blue wool, signature Illager building blocks that are out of place in the deep slate structure. They've set up camp and rebuilt broken structures to ease in their explorations. It's possible that they learned about the ominous bottles during this process, taking them from the ancient city for their own usage and experimentation. Now, let's return to the trial chambers. There's an overarching question here. Why would the ancient builders need such a well-trained military? Sure, managing the warden was part of that, but probably not all of it. To learn more, let's look at the combat situations that are included in the trial chambers. The trial spawners generate a variety of enemies. While there are some natural mobs, like spiders and silverfish, the majority of the enemies are undead, zombies, skeletons, and variations. If you've seen my previous deep dives, you'll know that undead enemies are evidence for a massive plague that swept through the overworld, infecting ancient builders and converting them into zombies and skeletons. Since there are no more ancient builders, we know that this disease ultimately infected or killed all of them. But it didn't happen instantaneously. There was a period of time where some, but not all, of the ancient builders were infected. As the world became increasingly hostile, it became more and more difficult for the remaining uninfected to fight for survival. Trial chambers were constructed during this transition period, after the zombie plague became a serious threat, but before everyone was infected. The trial chambers gave the survivors an opportunity to learn how to fight against undead enemies, teaching them how to handle this new threat. But the strategy of intentionally spawning infectious enemies was risky. Thus, the trial chambers had to be designed to mitigate the risk as much as possible. The chambers were sealed off from the world to reduce the chances of the disease escaping. Their extensive use of copper also has a reason. Copper is an antimicrobial material, which means that it can kill microorganisms on contact. This was an additional safety measure to limit the spread of the disease. While intentionally spawning zombies for training was risky, the ancient builders did as much as they could to make it relatively safe. Perhaps the bedrooms with no entrances were quarantine zones, places to put people who had been exposed to see the extent of their infection. The desperation for survival might have also been what drove them to construct the ancient cities, harnessing the immense power of Skulk despite the extreme danger of the Warden. Evidence of bad omen in both places suggests that these were used at a similar point in time. But ultimately, all of this proved futile. The disease eventually wiped out the ancient builders, leaving their structures behind. And while most of them crumbled and decayed, the sealed design of the trial chambers allowed it to remain pristine. In this way, the trial chambers stand alone, a view into the lives of the ancient builders at the height of their desperation, the best preserved piece of a culture lost forever. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe. It was very fun to make another deep dive, and I hope you liked it. What do you think? Does this theory make sense? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed the background music, you'll pretty soon be able to perform it for yourself. It's a piece of music for concert band that would be playable by a decent high school band. Once I finish the concert version, send it to your band director, ask them to play it next semester. It would be so cool if someone in the community would get a chance to perform this music. And if you do, send me an email or Discord message. I'd love to get a chance to watch your performance. We will go ahead and end with that. This has been RGN. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day.